Hi, and welcome to A Sense of Wellness podcast, inspiring and empowering a healthier you. I'm your host, Susan Greeley, and I'll be diving deeper into the 4 pillars of wellness: sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress management. Today, I'm excited to talk about our health span versus lifespan and living life with the goal of dying healthy. My guest today is a passionate health advocate and endurance sports coach who overcame childhood traumas and obstacles to become a highly accomplished athlete himself. Al Lyman, who is the author of the newly released and already highly acclaimed book, Age Well and Feel Great: The Proven Path to Solving the Aging Puzzle and Going the Distance, is a career musician as well as an athletic trainer and coach who began coaching runners and triathletes part-time in 1999. In 2010, he co-founded Pursuit Athletic Performance, where he provides movement therapy, gait analysis, coaching, and online exercise programs suitable for everyone, regardless of age or experience. Al has competed in hundreds of athletic events and competitions, including 9 Ironman triathlons, and his personal best in running he set at the Boston Marathon with a time of 2 hours, 39 minutes, and 37 seconds. Al has numerous certifications, and I would like to name them all because to me it's quite impressive. He has been certified as a sports therapist, a fascial stretch therapist, a strength and conditioning specialist, a functional range conditioning mobility specialist. He is a USA Triathlon coach, a USA Weightlifting coach, Barefoot training specialist, a functional movement screen provider, and finally, Al is also certified in Clinical Gait Analysis. Al is living his passions, which include sharing all that he's learned with others. Today, I am so excited to have Al Lyman with me. Thank you for being here.
Susan, it's such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. This is so much fun.
It is fun. And I already know that you and I could talk for days about fitness and movement and lifestyle habits and aging well. So I want to share with listeners, and I say we could talk for days, literally, Al, because your book, Age Well and Feel Great, is what, 600 and how many pages?
650 pages without including the 30 pages of references. Yeah, that makes it 680 something.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
It is crazy. It's crazy good. As you and I were just saying, I already want to jump kind of to the end and share with listeners that my favorite page, believe it or not, I think it was listed as 612, I could be wrong, is where you have the words of wisdom from Gandhi. But also you mentioned, I want listeners to jump ahead, follow your recommendation at the bottom of that page to watch that beautiful German commercial.
Oh, right? So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And I wanted to start with that to say, read this, get through to that point. And you shared something really special with that, Al. The funny thing is, I've lived in Germany for many years myself. Most people don't know that. And I'm fluent. So I even more appreciated it.
Wie geht's heute?
Oh, ganz gut. Es freut mich.
Too funny, right?
It is too funny. Yeah, ich kann fließend Deutsch. So isn't that such a beautiful video? I can't believe.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. In such a short period of time, it conveys so much emotion and so much meaning. The looks on all of the participants' faces and the fact that there's only one word spoken in the entire video. I think it's brilliant filmmaking. And I will say I've watched it at least 100 times and I tear up almost every time I watch it. And to me, it embodies what it's all about, what it is truly all about.
Yes, that is very true. The goal is to stay vital and vibrant as long as we are here in human form.
Yeah.
Correct.
As I say in the book, what's your why?
I was about to jump to your epilogue.
And what is greater, your fears or your hopes? And to me, and I just recorded a short video, Susan, which I'm excited for you to watch at some point after we record this. Mm-hmm. But I took a snippet from The Shawshank Redemption, which to me is also an incredible film. Mm-hmm. And it's that moment when Andy and Red are sitting up against the wall and Andy's talking about someday getting out of prison. And he talks about going to Zihuatanejo, the city on the coast of Mexico. And he's just, his eyes are sparkling and the music is pensive. And it's just this idea of hope for the future of someday being realizing this thing that we can envision. And to me, the commercial kind of represents the same thing. And of course, at the end of Shawshank, Red shows up on the beach, if you remember the movie, and he talks about, I hope the Pacific is as blue as I've seen it in my dreams. I hope I can shake my friend's hand. It's these little things which to me should give us all the impetus to do the work that we need to do every day. Because these memories we create, Susan, as embodied in this commercial, it's what matters most in life.
That sums it up. Al, thank you for including that. Honestly, we're going to start this podcast with me crying.
I mean, listen, I cry when I'm watching all of these things. And like my daughter's letter in the book, as
I cried.
we talked about, I mean, she was 14 when she wrote that. And Susan, just imagine for 2 years, I would go to the pool and I would come home and I would be crying some days or wanting to give up. And I couldn't understand why I was putting myself through this, trying to overcome this PTSD, this subconscious. I mean, it was fear. I really can't describe it. I still get emotional thinking about it. But my daughter could see what I was going through and then trying to help me and trying to work through it. And then when we finally got to Kona, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go out into the bay and swim. And so we would talk about it every day. Of course, when race day came, I got through the swim. But she understood. And my son, who was just a tiny little kid at the time, he understood as well, too. And we have an amazing relationship. But I think about her maturity, her emotional maturity at 14 to write that letter.
That comes across in that letter. So I'll take a step back and tell listeners what we're already talking about. So
because they're wondering, they're going like, what letter?
I know what exactly. Well, they need to read to find out because it's early on in the book and it is the most beautiful letter a child, I swear, could write to a parent. It gave me chills and made me cry as a mom myself, of course. And I have, right. And I've done triathlons, but your story is very inspiring in that. Okay, so I believe you weren't even athletic or involved in sports as a kid, I gathered. And then you started running at age 21 to get in shape. Yet it wasn't until 15 years later, at age 36, that you even learned to swim, because getting to that point meant that you needed to overcome some very serious obstacles and traumatic events. And you went on to become an Ironman triathlete. So that's what we're talking about. And I'm going to let you talk more about that, obviously, and how you really conquered so much to get where you are. And to that point, that day, and that letter from your daughter is included in the book for a very important reason.
Yeah. It's so funny, Susan. We all have a story. I'm as regular a guy as you'll ever speak to on a podcast. I mean, very average ability and average talent, but I was somehow intrinsically driven to work harder and be better. And I really believe, like when people ask me today, like, why did you do the Ironman? I go, oh, because I was bullied. I mean, yes. I think that was the vehicle for me to prove to myself that I was tough, that I was strong, that I could do it. And I turned that story, my history as a child, into the things that became perfectionism and became a drive to practice and work harder. So I'll say it's the dark side. I mean, I always love, and I think it was Shakespeare, and I included in the book, is, our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. Mm-hmm. And for me, I was driven to do more, but I also think that drive made it hard for my kids to grow up with me. And I apologize to them in the book, if you remember, in chapter 4, I think. And in fact, to everybody that, over the years, I may have intimidated with this seriousness, this intensity, which I know I came across at times, so probably a little too strong. But I think I'm definitely the least talented athletically that you ever speak to in a podcast. But the great thing about running is you just have to work really hard and be really smart. And so I became passionate about learning about the human body and trying to figure out other ways to train. And that's what led me eventually to open up the gait analysis with a sports physician, because my curiosity about the body, I knew physiologically I didn't have the maximal aerobic capacity or the innate athleticism to achieve what I wanted to, but I knew I was willing to work hard. And so it was really nothing more than just perseverance. And this is what I would hope your listeners would really hold on to, is this idea that it's always darkest before the dawn. We always give up on things a little bit before we can start to realize some of the benefits from these changes that we make. And we just have to have faith and belief in ourselves, right? And so as I sit here today, I was literally scared to death of the water as a 36-year-old. I coach a 5-time Ironman age group world champion, as you read about in the book, Lisbeth Kenyon, and so many other athletes that I've had the honor and privilege to work with and share their growth as people, to see how the events that they set goals to go after or their personal records they wanted to, it was really a vehicle for them to feel better about themselves, to empower themselves to become better parents, better citizens, better siblings, better partners. Because that's really, for me, it was always about feeling worthy, feeling like I was literally worthy of taking the air that was around me and breathing it in. And so it's really simple, right? It's not complicated. It's just, I think we all have these negative inner critics and we have this innate self-doubt. And so I knew when I wrote this book, it couldn't just be about physiology, and it couldn't just be about, hey, this is what you need to do. These are the exercises, whatever. I mean, none of that means anything if you can't envision a healthy second half of your life where you can literally do the things that you want to do with the people that you want to do them with. Now, I'll stop. I could just keep going. I'm so passionate about this.
I do know that. I do. Well, I love listening to it. And I'm going through, I have so many questions for you, Al. And it's funny because as you're saying this, what I love about your book throughout are those great quotes. And they really demonstrate, as what you're talking about now, that we as humans use the power of our thoughts to create our lives. And this podcast is all about inspiring and empowering people. And I really don't think that we can stress that enough, that we really do have the power within our minds. And that does need to be our starting point, wouldn't you say? Because I encounter so many people on a daily basis, over 50, over 60, over 70, who don't believe that they can age better or not, quote unquote, suffer from chronic conditions. Right? They kind of give up. And I think that what I hope to get out of our conversation today too is to help.
No, I mean, I love that story. Yeah. I mean, when I sat down to write this book, I thought, you know what? And the introduction is the first thing I wrote. And you'll know that in the introduction, there's some things that I'm a little bit redundant about that I talk about in the preface. And also that I talk about in chapter 1, what does it mean to die healthy, when I tell the story of my dad. And so there's a lot of kind of repetition in those 3 chapters that are all about belief. Most people don't believe the things that they do matter enough to change. It's that simple. We're surrounded by noise and messaging that tells us it just doesn't matter. And everything that we see around us, the manifestation of big food and big pharma and the marketing and also social media, despite the fact that some of it is inspirational and can be thought of as motivational, a lot of it ends up making people feel less good about themselves. And so I knew I needed to start by just trying to plant these messages constantly in people, constantly encouraging, and just getting people to believe enough to make one tiny little change. And then just repeat that. Just repeat it, because that is the magic. That is the secret weapon, right? That's the magic pixie dust. It's just one tiny change that turns into something that you do unconsciously without even thinking about it. So yeah, it's all about what you're saying, Susan. It's the belief. It has to be there first. You have to have this picture in your mind's eye of what it means to be healthy. This is why it's so important to me to walk the talk, right? To put myself out there and say, I'm real, I'm human, I make mistakes. It's not about perfection. It's not about exercising like a crazy man. It's certainly not about Ironman or any of that silly stuff. It's just about repeating good habits and trying to see the best in yourself and realizing that you're worth it. You're worthy. Your loved ones are worthy. And what is an evil sort of irony is when we allow our health to deteriorate, we end up becoming a burden to other people, the people we least want to burden. Right. And then we create all kinds of problems that come out of that. So again, I know I'm rambling a little bit.
No, it all ties together. I get so excited listening to you because that's it. Self-care and focusing on one's own personal health and having that wellness vision, this vision of health for yourself, for our second half of life, as you said, is so important. We can't actually underscore that enough. You can't say it too many times to me, Al. And I think for listeners, it's all of us need to hear things multiple times, and that's okay. So in that sense, I think that this is so important to keep repeating that. Those small, repeatable behaviors are how you get started. We're going to talk more about that. I also want to say that since I do focus on these 4 pillars, sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress, they are all tied together. You touch on all of them, of course. You can't necessarily separate one without the other. In particular, when we're talking about improving our health span, how we stay vital throughout life. However, I'll come back to, I do want to focus a lot on exercise and aging, and both because you've got so much experience there, but also because obviously that's the one pillar I wanted to talk about. People struggle as we get older with these chronic aches and pains. And again, the story that not believing that they can reach a stronger, healthier, more mobile place. So let's start there. Actually, Al, I have, again, quite a few questions.
Yeah.
Or what I would say is, from my perspective, and you and I both love the blue zones, before I go too much off on the blue zones, I'll just say that the longest living people are not sedentary. Right. And I believe one of the worst things for human health is to be sedentary, and that leads to premature aging. Is that true? And how does being sedentary lead to premature aging?
Well, of course, it is true, Susan. It's, I guess, the struggle we all have to incorporate exercise in our lives. I contributed, an entire chapter in the book, if you remember, the struggle is real.
Yes.
I talk about that. I thought that is such an important topic. And I was fascinated to learn that we're not wired to actually exercise as a species. And I think when we look back at our evolution as a species, we can see that movement used to be built into our everyday lives. We were nomadic as a species. And the running joke I have with a lot of my friends is I say, the moment we as a species left the food chain, the shit hit the fan. And it was kind of like, that's really what happened, right? Is our life has become more convenient, and we become sort of obsessed with luxury. And so much of it is marketing, right? But from an evolutionary perspective, we moved. And when you start to look at it from a microcosmic view at the cellular level and begin to understand how tissue, if it is not stressed, goes away, right? Movement, if it doesn't occur, goes away. I talk about tissue turnover in the book and spend quite a few pages talking about how if we stop utilizing some range of motion at the joint level, that range of motion will go away. It will decline. So this whole idea of hormetic stress, which is physical stress, right, in a lot of different forms, whether it's mild hunger or exercise, is maybe the critical message in the book. And it's hard for people. It's hard for me because you have to embrace this idea, right, that I have to challenge myself in order to remain healthy. That this idea that if I just relax more, do less, move less, challenge strength less, that I will grow weaker and the aging process will accelerate. And naturally, when we look at the blue zones, it's sort of, in any culture really, that movement is part of their lifestyle, and where they're not surrounded with luxurious items and items of convenience. We love our garage door openers, right? But like I talk about escalators in the book a little bit, and some of the studies that have been done that actually look at who takes the stairs versus the escalator. I never take the escalator.
How did I guess?
Forced to, right?
Right. You and I both.
Right. And so it's this mindset of how can I challenge myself? And the truth of the matter is the overwhelming majority of us are just thinking just the opposite. It's sort of like I need to reward myself for working hard or doing what I do or I've earned a certain amount of money. So now I can have these things which make my life easier. And as I say in the book, easy has a cost, right? Easy has a cost.
Mm-hmm. Quick and easy calories. There are too many of those. And same with, just as you pointed out, escalators. And there's endless examples, I'm sure. I really like that. And one of the questions I'll go ahead and ask this is, your advice in the book is to start small and consistent, but don't take it too easy, right? So what are some examples for people? How can they build that into their daily life without biohacking? And we're not even going down that topic, right? No. People see all these extreme things out there. And so this is, I really want to clarify, because it doesn't have to be extreme biohacking, right? It just needs to be small and consistent.
Well, Susan, let me respond to that in a couple of different ways by first saying In the book, I actually made a promise to myself that came out of requests from people that I work with. Because naturally we do, especially my coaching with some of the elite athletes that I work with, even the age group athletes, some of the training can get quite advanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fairly complex.
Mm-hmm.
But they made me promise, and I promised to myself, everything I put in the book would be accessible to anybody, anyone. Even if you're in a wheelchair, you can do isometric strength training, right? You can do a cat-cow sitting in a chair. And so everything I put in the book is accessible to anybody at all. That was really important to me. And I think what it brings up, to answer your question, is we're all an experiment of one. So if you are completely sedentary right now and even overweight, then simply getting up out of the chair and walking steadily for 5 minutes is a huge victory, because most people never walk for 5 minutes who are in that situation. The distance that it takes to get from the couch to the bathroom or the couch to the kitchen. So at the same time, if someone is already walking for a half hour a day or an hour a day, or they go to yoga class 3 times a week, but they don't do strength training, mm-hmm. or they don't do some kind of cardiovascular exercise that elevates their heart rate enough to get it out of what we would consider to be, aerobic, right? Then that's what those people need to do. So it really comes down to where you are. What's your starting point? If you are truly sedentary, even a 5-minute steady walk is a victory, right? But on the other hand, for those that are already active, they need to look at what's the missing piece? What's the box I'm not checking? When people ask me, like, why did you write a 650-page book? Because you know how expensive that's going to be. You know how hard it's going to be to give that away. People don't want to carry around a book that thick. I'm like, listen, I didn't start out intending to write a book that large. But what I absolutely knew was that even in the realm of those of us who are active, or who are conscious of how we're living our life, who want to be healthy, there's missing pieces that can often be problem areas that can end up leading to problems, leading to health issues, right? For example, I use the classic example of someone who attends yoga, who's got a lot of joint mobility, a lot of flexibility, and they think they're doing all they need to do to age well. But if they're not challenging their strength, if they're not engaging muscle and literally contracting it, then that muscle is going away. And ultimately, they're just going to be beating up on their joints because the muscle is no longer there, right, to take the impact of the load. More than any other thing as we age is muscle tissue, maintaining muscle. That is absolutely critical, because that wasting happens at an accelerated rate. Starts out at 2 to 4 or 5% per year after age of 40, but it can accelerate. So that's a long-winded way of saying, wherever any of your listeners might be right now, just accept where you are, be where you are, and just try to do a little bit more from there, wherever that is. And it can be anywhere on that spectrum, from overweight and sedentary to someone who goes and does boot camp 5 times a week, but there may be another missing piece to the puzzle. That's why it's a 600-page book, because all these things matter, Susan. They all matter.
They definitely all matter. And that really summarized it too, because clearly we don't know where listeners are in their own personal journey, right? We don't know what their starting point is today or what their why is. It's just important to talk about it. And for me, actually, just hearing you say all that, instead of asking you a question, because you actually kind of already answered it, this is something that I tell clients every single day, is to do something active daily, and something is better than nothing. So be it 5 minutes. And as you said, if you have always taken the escalator or the elevator, take the stairs this time in that building, right? And
yes,
so
it's all residual and it all adds up, right?
Thank you.
In the book, I share this term, which has become somewhat cliche in the fitness world, but movement snacks, right? Everything I do is done as a movement snack. I never go to the gym and spend an hour.
I don't have an hour.
Exactly, right? But you have 2 minutes, right, to get down and do a single push-up or to get up against the wall and do a wall slide, or to do some neck circles or shoulder circles or some kind of movement snack, which basically engages tissue, gets joints moving. And all of these things add up, right? It's all cumulative. It's incredible. It's like compound interest, right? And I think I used that analogy in the book, but it's so simple, Susan, but it's hard because we aren't innately wired to do that, right? So we have to find the impetus and the belief that we're worth it, and we have to do it. The taking the action is the hardest part. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for me. And this is my life, right? It's what I'm passionate about. But that first step is the hardest. It's the old cliche about motivation. Everybody's looking for the motivation to do something. But the reality is they're thinking of it in the opposite way. Motivation doesn't happen like pixie dust. It comes from action. Action leads to motivation. When you begin to get a little bit of that momentum, you feel better about yourself. You get a little inertia. You start to feel the benefits of what you're doing. That motivates you to continue. So it's really the opposite of what most people think.
No, that's very true. You start doing it, and then the motivation to stay and continue. You experience that.
Just got to stick with it long enough to feel some of those benefits, right? But one of the things that when I write about it in the book, I always make sure to tell the athletes that I work with, wherever they are on the spectrum of their own athletic development, is feel really good about whatever progress they've made, right? Wherever they are, look back on the things that they're doing well. And I always told my children this when they were growing: don't focus on the things that you struggle with. Remember the things that you do well. And I would encourage your listeners, if they could, for example, let's talk about and just use it in the spectrum of exercise. But if someone actually, after listening to this podcast, says, you know what, Susan and Al are right. I'm going to set my alarm, or I'm going to set a beeper, and every 10 minutes, I'm going to get out of my chair and I'm going to walk around my house. I'm going to do that every 10 minutes. If they find the will to push against this resistance that was telling them, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. You don't need. If they can do that, right? Pat yourself on the back. Like, that's amazing. You may think it's not much. Like, I'm an Ironman athlete. Who cares about that? That's amazing for someone who hasn't done that before, who didn't have the impetus to do that, who didn't find the will or the belief to do that, right? If they do that, then I think that's amazing. I would give them a hug. If I saw them, I would hug them and pat them on the back and just say, I'm so proud of them for doing that. And that's what we need to do for ourselves, right? When we take that action, give yourself the pat on the back.
I absolutely love that, Al. You keep answering my questions before I ask them. It's funny because one of my questions was, how do you help your clients or help anybody overcome the negative self-talk about their aging bodies and their health and get them going? And you just completely gave us so much motivational talk right there and answered that question. And I think that most of us adults, at least, don't think in those terms of allowing ourselves to kind of revel or bask in those little wins. And there are little wins. We all need small treats every day. And a small treat, right?
Do we ever? And of course, they need to be real, right? Yes. So they need to be based on something which is tangible. When I think back on the feedback that I've gotten on the book since it was released about 10 days ago, and even from the launch team, the folks who were reading it before, when I wrote this book, I knew in my heart that I needed to be vulnerable, right? That I needed to show the real me, which is very average, which was bullied as a 10-year-old, which had a near drowning, which made me scared of the water. It was very embarrassing, very humiliating throughout most of all those years leading up to that. Because I think the average person across our society, when they look at a guy like me and they say, oh, he's, an Ironman this, or did the Boston Marathon, he's different than me.
Right.
And I'm not any different.
Yeah. So wonderful about your book.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I'm real. I struggle with all of this. The difference was that I had this intrinsic drive to continue to push forward. And also, we talk about quotes. I don't know if you can see this. I have a tattoo on my arm.
A little close. It's hard to see. Oh, hang on.
It's a quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, that is in your book. I love this one. But go ahead and say it, because I don't know.
It's the impediment to action advances action.
Yes.
Stands in the way becomes the way, right? It's this idea that it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. Life is not easy. I mean, my dad told me that when I was very young. And he also told me the world was filled with a lot of jerks and I was just going to have to learn to deal with them. I always laugh when I think back on it. And by the way, I have another tattoo over here that says make him proud, because I get up every day thinking about how I could make my dad proud.
I feel the same. I do the same, actually. I'm very driven by that. I've lost both of my parents and to terrible diseases. And that is very motivating. And, again, we all have our own stories, but that's part of it. And then tapping into that intrinsic belief and desire to live better and healthier. I don't want to die the way my parents died.
It's so funny, Susan. And I don't know if you remember this reading in chapter 1. All of these stories are so personal to me, obviously. But for a very long time, when I thought about my dad, because I watched him become sicker and sicker. And
terrible.
For many years, I blamed him. I was angry at him. I was like, why can't, what I grew to understand, and I tried to share this in the book, is he did the best that he could. He just didn't know any better. He didn't have the tools. He didn't have the broad knowledge and the experience, right?
Right.
And so I became much more empathetic of the struggle that he had. And I think everybody needs to understand that, is that we're all trying to do the best that we can. And sometimes unfortunate things happen and we just have to try to grow from that.
That is very true. I have to share a little bit about my own story. So it's almost opposite in a way with our fathers, who were the same generation. My father was very healthy his entire life. He was an athlete. He was a state champion, high hurdler, very lean.
Good genes, huh? You have good genes.
Yes. However, then you have children in life, and it was that generation that drove to work, sat at work. He was the quintessential dad and provider, and put on a suit every day and sat at a desk and came home and was tired. He became sedentary, is the bottom line. And I believe that my father, who ended up with Parkinson's with dementia, who had been an athlete younger in life, his being sedentary. And this is why it is also so personal and passionate to me to talk about how important it is to not be sedentary. And in any case, I saw that and it made me very sad, because for all intents and purposes, he looked healthy. He looked the part, but the lack of activity and stress. So those two things, being sedentary and stress, caused his demise. Yeah. And then we could talk about nutrition separately. He had somewhat, I do think that came into play as well, but the stress and lack of activity for most of his adult life in taking care of his family, the people he loved the most, right, ended up in a terrible illness.
Susan, it's crazy. I think the average person doesn't really understand how important muscle is and movement is to our health, not from the standpoint of picking up heavy things. Mm-hmm. There's a TEDx talk. It was recorded many years ago by a physiologist. His name is Brendan Egan. And I utilize a number of his slides in the book, because his talk is Muscle Matters. And it's a short 20-minute talk, but what he does is he delves into all of the other health aspects that are impacted, cognitive health, to talk about one thing, right? It's because it's all interrelated. But I was kind of taken aback when I listened to that presentation, and I got in touch with him, and we become sort of acquaintances because I asked to borrow some of his slides and his images. He's like, hey man, take it. But that really caused me to want to research more and really try to understand how movement and being outside, being in the sun, right? Mm-hmm. Interacting with nature. I tell everybody to spend more time barefooted. There's a real reason for that. I don't know if it's grounding but I know that connecting with the world and appreciating the beauty that's around us and feeling the rays of the sun and interacting with nature has a powerful effect on us. And then when we get out there and move and exercise and challenge ourselves in nature and get out of the gym, off the treadmill or whatever it else may be, not that is bad, but just this idea that it's all interrelated. And unfortunately, your dad and my dad as well, were trapped in this routine that, unfortunately.
We both witnessed it. And we'll stop there because you and I will both get even more emotional.
Yeah, I think about my dad so much naturally, not just because I miss him, but because he was such a good person. And watching him die over the course of 10 months from a glioblastoma, and we kept him in his home and in his bed until his last day. And I remember how angry he was. And I used to sleep on the floor by his bed And my sisters and I, we would take turns sleeping alongside him. And, he was 80 pounds. This is a man that was 6'2" and, 200 pounds when he was healthy, but he was 80 pounds when he passed. And it broke my heart every single day. And so I think about him and I think how he suffered. And I think all the memories. I have 2 grandchildren now, right? And I think about their relationship they could have with him. And so I try to paint this picture in the book. Imagine being at your great grandchild's college graduation.
That's my goal too. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Those are the memories, Susan, that matter the most.
Yes.
It's more important than anything else. No amount of money, no amount of status, no amount of material possessions, none of that matters.
That's right. So I have to bring in the German commercial again, and I don't want to give a complete spoiler. We'll change the man. So now I understand even more why it makes both of us cry for multiple reasons. But yeah, next version, they have to put an older woman in there. It'll be me.
I'll tell you, writing, I was so impacted by that commercial that I said, I have to include this in the book. And of course, how do you capture in words what that video presents? And I really struggled with that. It took me a long time to write those couple of pages.
Goosebumps now. So it's something to be seen instead of read or talked about. Yeah. Isn't that funny? Well, so back to the key thing there that you said about maintaining strength and mobility. I wrote down several words here: balance, strength, mobility, and also stretching. So I think there's a lot there when we talk about moving more and staying mobile and all that overwhelms people. So if you have only so much time in a day and we say, go out into nature. I did yesterday. I got out after a long car drive home from my Thanksgiving trip to see family. First thing I did when I got home, even though I had a lot to do, is quickly went for a walk outside. And then I realized how tight my hips were and I needed to stretch. But okay, so we want to do all these things on a daily basis. And how important is stretching? Do we all need to do it versus spending time on, I guess, how do we balance all of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you think back to the book, you will notice that I didn't talk a lot about stretching. I spent a couple of pages and I actually shared a URL to a follow-along video that I created that is on my website that takes people through a variety of stretching for the spine and the hips. Here's why I didn't do that, why I didn't focus a lot on stretching. Because one of the things that I learned in my many years doing gait analysis is, first of all, we're all, and listen, it's cliche, but we're all unique in terms of our muscle lengths. Okay. And also one body part to another. In other words, you could be quite flexible in the shoulder girdle, but not nearly as flexible in some other part of your body. But more importantly, Susan, what I learned was that most flexibility challenges are stability problems, and they're neurological in nature. So what I mean by that is, and the analogy I often used in the gait lab is, imagine for a moment you're driving your car and you get rear-ended. Unfortunate, but it happens, right? So maybe you get a little minor whiplash, right? Not you, but just hypothetically, right?
Oh, no, I'm not laughing. It happened to me during COVID.
Right. So what happens is your brain, which its primary job is to protect you. That's its job, among other things. And I'm not a neurologist, so I don't want to talk like I am, but it's just what I've learned over many years studying movement. But so what happens is that immediately all the muscles around your neck begin to go into spasm and tighten, and you can no longer move freely. That tightness, that restriction in motion is not a lack of flexibility. It is neurological in nature because your brain sensed that there was something unstable, that there was a problem in some area related to, in this case, your neck, your cervical spine. So what I learned over many years was, and I'll use the hamstrings, the muscles behind in the back of the thigh as a classic example, because everybody gets tight hamstrings.
Definitely.
Right? So what I learned was that when I was able to help people become more stable, specifically around their hips and their pelvic girdle, that over time, the hamstring tension went away.
Loosened. Okay.
Right. And so everybody says, I keep stretching my hamstrings, but they just feel tighter. It feels good for a while, but then the tightness comes back. So I didn't want this book to be here are the stretches that everybody should do, because nobody should ever do the same stretches. That's the first thing, right? Like the worst thing that happens in gym class is when the gym teacher gives all 25 kids the same stretch to do, because you got Sally and Betty over here on the left who are hyper mobile, if there's such a thing. I'm not sure there is, but they got a lot of joint mobility, a lot of flexibility. In fact, so much so that they may have an introverted hip or something else that allows for their knees to collapse toward the midline. And now these girls, the last thing in the world they need to do is stretch. But then you got Tommy and Joe over here on the other side. They're endomorphs, so they're really muscular, and they have innately shorter muscle lengths. They might benefit from a little bit of flexibility work, especially because they're in the weight room morning, noon, and night doing bench pressing and back squatting. So I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but the point is those kids don't need the same stretches, right? They don't need the same movement practice. They're really individual and unique. So in the book, I said, you know what? I'm not going to talk a lot about stretching, because actually every book about health talks about stretching, when the reality is most flexibility problems are stability problems. It's about becoming stable. It's about engaging muscles around the joints, and it's about moving the joints themselves, right? So all those movement snacks that I've included, whether it's the shoulder rotations and even the body weight squat challenge, is a fantastic exercise to move your ankles, move your knees, and move your hips and move your spine, all in in a movement that is very natural for the human body, but most people can't do now, especially most people in our society. So yeah, I don't want people going off and just doing static stretching. That's not the answer.
I am really happy I asked that question.
Yeah. It's important.
It is very important. People get, and I think they don't know, and they just sit down and start by doing, as you said, some of the static stretches. So thank you. That's really, really helpful.
And let me say one more thing on that topic, because for any of your listeners that may end up reading the book,
right?
And for you yourself,
yes.
When I thought about what's the easiest way to help the average person right up to the elite level athlete, not only get stronger, but also become more stable, the answer is isometric strength training. If you read that chapter, you'll know that one of the principles of that training is to radiate tension from within. So I have this exercise I do all the time with people where I'll demonstrate to them what that really means. And let me show you. So imagine that is the floor.
Okay.
And that's the ceiling. And I'm setting up to do a push-up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've set myself up. I've now engaged my back. I'm squeezing and tensioning everything. Now I'm going to do this really slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
this is awesome.
6. Pushing the wall, pushing the floor away. 2, 3, 4, 5. Ugh.
Wow.
Right? So
that was
no resistance.
So
except what I created internally.
Yes.
This is the key for every person, because when you can generate tension from within, you now connect the dots. You've now integrated your body. So in that air push-up I didn't need weight. I didn't go to the gym and, start doing this with a dumbbell. And that, in fact, is how people get injured, because their shoulders or back may not be interconnected and integrated in a way that protects the joint or protects the smaller muscles. When you generate tension from within, you're now creating integration. You're now stabilizing the joints, right? And engaging muscle. So that is why I include that isometric strength training. And it can be done anywhere, anytime.
Anywhere, anytime. I had to reiterate that. That is the most important thing, because people don't really want to make excuses. I think they just don't know where to start sometimes.
That's right. Yeah.
So even if you start with 2 planks a day and 1 push-up.
I mean, literally, it is as simple. I tried to make it in the book as simple, not easy, but as simple as possible for anyone. Because at some point, we're always looking for the quick fix. We're always looking for the easier path. That's why I hate the word hack. There's no hack. There's no hack. You have to do the work.
Completely agree.
You have to do the work. Yeah.
Right. Yes, that I'll stop myself from going off on a tangent about that. That was perfectly said.
Yeah.
And this is a segue to a different topic. It just, in seeing you do that push up, the air push up, made me think of air guitar. You don't play air guitar. But as a musician, I do want to bring this up because I find it so fascinating. And I think in talking to you now, I can see more and more how that dedication to all that practice to become a professional musician does transfer over to athleticism. But to put it into a question for you, I am really curious if you do somehow apply your musical career in general to your training and coaching and, your other career.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, it could never be separated, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I think it's who I am, but the process of learning a skill, whatever the skill may be, is most of us know how to type, but we started out not knowing where one key is, and right. But, I learned from Mavis Beacon. It was that kind of online little program. I don't know, way back when, on my Atari computer or whatever.
Yeah.
But the point is that methodical approach to skill development that I learned as a musician, and then the requirement for all of my senses to be involved, right?
Right.
You're listening, you're interpreting, you're executing, and that is applicable for anything that we do in life, right? It's all a skill. And I say this in the book. These are all skills, and they require repetition. One of the greatest books that your readers could jump on after they age well and feel great is The Talent Code. It's a really great book that talks about where talent comes from. And it's just this idea of a regular application of a skill. It's simple. Now, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Definitely. Just that methodical and repeating. No, it absolutely does. I'm kind of envious because I think then, becoming, I'd call it an athlete later in life, was maybe easier for you because of your musical career. You were already very adept at finding that habit and repeating it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could say I had a work ethic.
That's exactly that drive, work. It all, it's so much of, right, your background that all came together. But
I was driven. I went to music school as a 17-year-old. I attended the Boston Conservatory of Music, and so I had this opportunity to study and try to become a performer. And I was scared to death that I was never going to have a job. And I think fear is a great motivator, right? I mean, if in the right context, right? Not something that basically takes us out of finding some purpose, but rather gives us some impetus to take action. Right. So, I would practice for many, many hours a day, lock myself in the practice room for many, many hours, and always motivated to try to, show the teacher that I hadn't wasted his time whenever I showed up for a lesson. And I think it really is true for any of your listeners. They have their story. They have their, profession, their vocation. And Susan, it's fascinating to me, actually, to see people who are so accomplished in their own line of work, who have applied these same principles in their line of work, in their study, in their relentless pursuit, but have just gotten off track. But I have a hard time connecting the dots and seeing that the pursuit of good health is really the same path.
Yes.
The thing is, it's more important than any of those other paths. It has to be, because self-care is the greatest expression of self-love. And self-love is where it all starts. If you can't learn to love yourself and act in a way in which your health matters the most, more than anything, then you can't be anything else to anyone else in the way that you want to be.
Amen. Health really is wealth. That's it. And I love what you just said, that self-care is the greatest expression of self-love.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Yeah. It really, I hope, more than resonates with listeners.
It's the foundation.
It is.
It's the foundation for hope.
Yeah, sorry.
Susan, right? Like nothing happens without hope. It's like I'm often asked, or if I'm talking with somebody, I'm asked if I'm religious or spiritual. And I go, in the context of hope, I know that faith gives people hope for the future, maybe a better life and, whatever. The point is, self-love is the basis and the foundation for hope. whatever is happening in the world, whatever the craziness is that's going on in politics and around the globe, when we start with where we are, where our feet are, if we don't have hope for the future, then everything else is kind of lost.
I think that that's a really important statement right there too, and all at any age. And I know, because I'm sure you also encounter clients and people also late in life who haven't come to that realization yet, unfortunately. So that's why we're talking about this. This is, yeah, self-care, self-love. I know we have been talking a very long time, Al. So I'll start to try to wind down and ask you just a couple of my final questions, because this is such a wonderful conversation, truly hitting on my goal to inspire and empower our listeners. And I would love to have you back. That said, Al, I'll go ahead and ask you one of the final questions I ask of all my guests, which is, what is one thing you're grateful for today? And today in particular, we're closing out the Thanksgiving weekend. So it's a time that really, strangely enough, is all about gratitude.
I am, oh my God. I talk about this in the book, right?
So important.
In fact, I mentioned that, I think around the time that I was writing a particular chapter, I saw the movie Father Stu, and the quote from that movie about how life will give you 1,000 reasons to be angry, but you only need one to be grateful. And I think that really is so important. This idea that, for me anyway, the health of my children and their well-being and their happiness is something that I'm so grateful for every day, but I also know it's a moving target. But I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share what I'm passionate about. To be honest with you, I don't know why I'm sitting here right now talking to you. I don't know why.
How cool is life?
I mean, listen, Susan, it's been hard. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Trying to be a small business person, trying to sell athletes on this idea that they should train for the betterment of their body and not to its detriment, that is not easy, right? It has been a hard road for me, much harder than it might appear looking from the outside in. But I'm so grateful that I've been able to impact lives in a positive way. Like, if my life were to end tomorrow, I know there would be people that said something that I said to them or that we did together enriched their life. And that is amazing and something I'm really grateful for.
That's very fulfilling. Well, I would like to repeat that I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak with you, to meet you and have you here with me so that we can be sharing this and impacting people's lives. And I know we do, even if it's one person, right, who listens to this podcast. So thank you.
It's one at a time, Susan.
One at a time.
It's so funny, right? Like, everybody thinks, you just you flip a switch and you can impact 10,000 lives. But I have these little conversations every single day. Sometimes it's email, sometimes it's text. And it's been crazy now with the book because of all of the reviews that have been posted and people that have shared their comments with me. I got 2 or 3 emails just before we got on, people saying amazing things. But it really is one person at a time. It's one person at a time. I mean, if you want to change the world, be the change that you want to see in the world. Mm-hmm. That's the way I try to live.
Page 612. I love it. It's not.
We haven't even talked about nutrition yet. So I
know. So that's to be continued because that'll take multiple hours, I'm sure. Yeah. And even though we tend to overcomplicate, I think many people overcomplicate nutrition. There's still so many specifics that we can get to. We'll just leave it as, I hope everybody detoxes after their Thanksgiving. I know I personally consume more sugar than I normally do.
Yeah, I probably did too. But, again, every day is a new day. Every day is a new day, right?
Every day is a new day. Yeah. Yes. Started with my steel cut oats and raspberries today. And so on that note, the idea is to die young as late in life as possible. That's one of the quotes I love from your book. I loved every single quote in your book. And I would love to say, I'll see you again soon to continue this amazing conversation. And thank you again, Al. And
it's been such a pleasure. I've had so much fun talking with you, and it's great. It's great to meet you virtually, and I love sharing. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I would love to meet you in person someday, to be continued. Before I forget, and I apologize, I did mean to ask you, where can listeners find you? What's the best place to find you? You referred to some videos and your website.
Yeah, I mean, my company website is pursuitathleticperformance.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is the @Al_Lyman. So that's a good place to go. I'm posting there very frequently with hopefully inspiring tidbits and quotes from the book.
Yes.
And, amazingly, Susan, right now, this book is less than $20 on Amazon. It's crazy to me.
It's holiday season. I have to tell people, please do yourselves a favor, gift it, buy it for yourself, whatever it is. Do that. As I said, everybody deserves some small treats every day. Treat yourself to Al's book. I sincerely mean that. And finally, I will say, I do follow you on Instagram and LinkedIn and all that. And we didn't even get to talk about arthritis and achiness and joint stiffness. So to be continued. Okay, Al?
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great.
Again, can't thank you enough.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to join me and listen to this episode. Listeners can find more information and also subscribe to the Sense of Wellness podcast at www.ccphp.net/SENS/podcast. That's www.ccphp.net/SENS/podcast. This show is brought to you by Castle Connolly Private Health Partners. We are a concierge medicine organization that partners with exceptional physicians to deliver an unrivaled healthcare experience while also empowering our members to achieve their optimal well-being. Be sure to listen in next time to the Sense of Wellness podcast, and remember, simple daily habits matter most.